So before we continue, let's take a minute to look at the final model. So far in our previous video, we introduced a budget line. So ignore these curves for a second and focus only on our budget line in black here. It has three possible points on it, A, B, and C. How do we know which of those 3 points would be the best point for this consumer to purchase? Well, in order to know that, we need to know something about utility, or how much the consumer likes these various goods. So the basic idea of utility is that as long as the consumer knows how much they like each of the possible goods, they can put numeric values on consuming those. And so what we can do is specify numeric values for all possible combinations of goods and service. All right, so once again, look at A, B, and C. Which of those 3 points is the best to buy? Well, we can measure how much happiness the consumer gets out of point A, point B, and point C. All right, we can also specify fields of all of the possible combinations that make the consumer equally happy. So consider, let's put some numbers on here. Suppose that I2, this curve right here, makes the consumer 10 happy, I0 makes them 15 happy, and I1 makes them 20 happy. We know they have to be increasing as they go higher and to the right because those are combinations where they have more stuff. Economically, more is generally taken to be better. Okay, so which is the best point on here for the consumer? Clearly it's B, right? Because B is on a higher indifference curve than the other two. We just said, given the random numbers, that points A and C were worth 15 to the consumer. And point B is up here on this higher indifference curve with 20 happiness. Right, so the point of this whole model, now we have a budget line. We know what's affordable given the budget. We need to know how happy the possible combinations of points would make us so that we can purchase the best possible combination, which again on this picture is B. All right, so let's build up our model of utility. Utility is just a measure of how much joy or happiness we get out of consuming a good or service. So it's the way that we're going to measure and compare possibilities for the consumer to consume. All right, we need to consider total utility, which is the total amount of happiness that one gets from consuming a given quantity of a good or service. For instance, if I eat 10 jelly beans, it makes me 100 happy. This is a measure of total utility. But oftentimes, economists like to do what we call thinking on the margin. So the rest of this module is going to be thinking about if the consumer buys and consumes one more additional unit, how much additional happiness will that bring? In other words, we're going to be talking about marginal utility. Marginal utility measures the additional satisfaction from consuming one more unit of a good or service. So I already said if I consume 10 jelly beans, I will be 100 total happy. But how much additional happiness did I get when I went from eating, say, 9 jelly beans to 10 jelly beans, or 0 jelly beans to 1 jelly bean? The amount of additional satisfaction I get from consuming is our marginal utility, and marginal utility is going to be the primary measure of decision-making for consumers in this class. All right, so our assumptions here, our consumer has a budget constraint, and we assume that a rational consumer will use their income to maximize their utility. In other words, to make themselves as happy as possible. So we can find the best point on the budget line to consume, knowing the consumer's utility. And of course, this might vary for everyone. Just because one person likes things a certain way doesn't mean another person will. Very dependent on the person. Here we're just analyzing some example person, but regardless, we need to know exactly what the utilities are to do this calculation. All right, we also have what we call the law of diminishing marginal utility, which states that as one consumes more of a product, the marginal utility or additional satisfaction of each additional unit decreases. And so you can think of as you're eating something, you start hungry, the first unit or two that you eat are really good, they start filling you up. But as you start eating more and more, the additional satisfaction you get from eating more starts decreasing and decreasing. And in theory, it could eventually become negative, right? If you eat any, you're already so full that if you eat any more, you'll start feeling bad. So the marginal utility of eating has diminished and diminished until you're full and there is no utility from eating anymore. All right, so this is the idea behind diminishing marginal utility. And so we can see this in practice here. Suppose we have a total utility curve for a number of units. It's going up and up and up. But then at some point, it looks like around 5 units in this random example, we're satiated, and consuming more does not get us any additional utility. All right, so then we can map out our marginal utility, right? When we go from consuming 0 units to 1 unit, how much additional utility do we get? And then 1 unit to 2, how much additional utility do we get? So the additional utility that we get can be mapped out. And then once again, here at like 5 units, our marginal utility becomes negative, and we can see that our total utility will actually decline if we eat any more or consume any more of the good. All right, so the principle of diminishing marginal utility can be used to explain what? Why Todd's second soda is less enjoyable than his first soda. Yes, that's a possible answer, right? If marginal utility is diminishing, then each additional soda Todd drinks will be less enjoyable than the previous. Why Todd's first soda is less enjoyable than second soda. If the second soda is better, that would be increasing marginal utility. Why Amy's third soda is less enjoyable than Todd's first soda. Again, these utilities are not interpersonally comparable. We can only compare one person's decision, how much they like soda, for example. And so same explanation for D. We can't compare Amy and Todd. We can only compare Amy versus Amy. If Amy drinks 2 sodas or 3, or if Todd drinks 1 soda or 2, for example. So C, D, and E, all of these we cannot compare. We can only know why Todd likes soda less and less as he drinks more of it. All right, so what's the rule then for an optimal decision? Now, this is actually provable mathematically. I won't put you through that, but the rule for the optimal decision is that the consumer will maximize satisfaction where the marginal utility per dollar is equal across all goods. All right, so again, we could show this from the graph and mathematically, but let's just think about it in words. What's going on here? So let's consider only good A, right? Suppose that good A gives us a marginal utility. If I consume another unit of good A, then I will get, say, 10 more satisfaction. And say this good costs $1. All right, so the marginal utility per dollar, I get 10 satisfaction, it costs me $1. My marginal utility per dollar is 10. Well, what about good B? Suppose I also get 10 marginal utility from good B, but good B costs $2. Which one should I buy? Well, the first one gives me 10 marginal utility per dollar. The second one would give me 10 marginal utility divided by $2, or 5. So it's clear that good A gives me higher marginal utility per dollar. So what am I going to choose? I'm going to choose good A. All right, due to the diminishing marginal utility, what happens after I consume a good A? Right, I've purchased and consumed a good A, giving me 10 additional utility. If I purchase and consume another one, the marginal utility of the next unit will be slightly lower than before. So the idea here is I'm deciding whether to purchase A or B. A has higher marginal utility per dollar, so I buy it, but then the marginal utility per dollar of the next unit will fall. It'll keep falling and falling and falling. I should keep purchasing A so long as the marginal utility per dollar is higher than B. But eventually, as I consume more A, the marginal utility is going to fall, such that if I have enough A, it might become ultimately more valuable to start buying B, right? Suppose I keep on buying more and more and more A until the marginal utility of the next A I consume would only be 4. All right, the marginal utility per dollar of A is 4 divided by 1. Or we can have 10 marginal utility for a price of $2 if I buy B. The marginal utility per dollar now of B is higher, And so I would switch to buying that. What happens when I buy B? The marginal utility goes down. And so ultimately, if I'm choosing correctly and I keep on buying and buying, these will approximately equal out. Now, again, if you want a more mathematical proof for derivation of this rule, go ahead and contact me. Let's see this rule in practice. So the consumer always chooses the good with the highest marginal utility per dollar. All right, so suppose consuming good A gives a total utility of 100, while consuming good B gives a total utility of 10. Which of the following is true? The consumer should always pick good A. Well, we're not sure. We need to know what the price is. If the price of good A is $1 million, that might not be a very good deal. If the price of good A is 10 cents, it might be a great deal. We don't know until we know what the price is, so we can know the marginal utility per dollar. Likewise, for answer B, just knowing the utility is not good enough. We need to know how much it costs to know which one we should consume. All right, the decision to pick A or B will depend on the prices. That should be the answer. Consumer should pick whichever good is cheaper. No, because we need the one with the higher marginal utility per dollar. All right, so the decision which good to pick depends on the prices. All right, how about this one? A sushi roll costs $8 and gives 25 utils. Or in other words, if we eat one more sushi, we get 25 more happiness. If we eat one more sashimi, we'll get 10 more happiness. Sushi costs 8, sashimi costs 4. Which item should one consume next if they have these preferences? Well, again, we need our marginal utility per dollar. What is the marginal utility per dollar of a sushi roll? It gives 25 more utility at a price of $8. So the marginal utility per dollar is just over 3. 25 divided by 8 would be 3 1/8. What about sashimi? Sashimi gets 10 extra utility for consuming at a price of $4. So the marginal utility per dollar of sashimi is 10 divided by $4, or $2.50. Which one's higher? The sushi roll has a higher marginal utility per dollar. So the next item that this consumer should purchase and consume would be a sushi roll. Right after this consumer consumes the sushi roll, their marginal utility of the sushi roll will decrease. And so if we asked, should they purchase another sushi roll versus a sashimi, we wouldn't know. We would need to know the marginal utility of the next sushi roll after that to see if it has fallen. Right, so here's the question, kind of jump the gun. Suppose that the person in the previous question consumes the sushi roll. The marginal utility per dollar of the next sushi roll would be higher, lower, or equal than the first. Our law of diminishing marginal utility tells us that if we eat a sushi roll already, the next sushi roll we eat should have lower marginal utility than the previous. All right, so when we come back, I'll do one more video where we kind of walk through a classic homework quiz type of problem where we're analyzing marginal utility per dollar.